I just got back to India yesterday,
Oh,
so I'm still a bit kind of um, disoriented. So I'm sorry that I joined
no, no. I mean, it's very kind of you to have agreed to be here. So, yeah. But I let the host take over, Shubhi Apti, and yeah, please. I'm so sorry for the chit chat. Good to see Asya also. Yeah.
Good afternoon, Professor Chaudhary. Welcome to the fest. We'll formally begin and then we'll introduce you. Amber, what's the delay? Can we?
Yes, ma'am. We should begin now. You guys are talking, so I just let that happen.
Yeah.
Okay. Good morning, sir. All right, so let's begin. Hello and welcome, everyone. Warm greetings to all of you, to our respected head of department, Professor Seni Malhotra, the ELA advisor, Professor Shubhi Agati, and our esteemed chief guest, Mr. Amit Chaudhary, and to all the other participants. I am Amber, and with me today, I will be joined by my friend Shivangi to be the host of today's event. We extend our warmest greetings to all of you and welcome you all to the annual Literary Fest Lexicon being organized by the Department of English, Jamia Millia Islamia. Over to you, Shivangi.
Uh, Good afternoon, everyone. I hope it's good afternoon. So I'll begin with talking about Jamia Millia Islamia first. The Department of English has been a part of this institution from the very beginning, as we all know, steadily growing to become one of the greatest departments of the university. In addition to the attention paid on academic enrichment of the students, the department focuses on overall development. The English Literary Association of the department organizes extracurricular activities in addition to lectures and interactive sessions with eminent national and international scholars and writers. The department has been able to nurture the talents of the students through various events, talks, and programs. During the 2020 chapter of Lexicon, we had ventured onto the topic of disease and its tales in literature. We had organized many events such as a webinar, a paper presentation, slam poetry, open mic, and many more. The reason this theme was suitable for our 2020 was because it corresponded to the era we were all surviving in. And while most of us turn to literature, we, as the students of literature and language, are known for making literature our everything. From an escape mechanism to our relief. And as the pandemic rolled, we had to focus on the deadly disease filled morbid part of literature to bring us peace and keep us grounded. But now we're in 2022, and 2 years after all the destruction, death, and melancholy, we are back to literature, giving it the power to heal us, making it our healing instrument. Keeping all this in mind, Kintsugi was the best theme we could come up with. I mean, remember that we were done for as well. We thought that while all of us are still healing from the effects of the prevailing global pandemic, why not make it the theme of this auspicious event? And so we found Kintsugi. Kintsugi is claimed to have begun in the 15th century when a Japanese shogun shattered a treasured teacup and returned it to China to be repaired. However, the repair technique, which was done using metal staples, the usual for restoration at the time, detracted from for the board's beauty. Dissatisfied, the shogun solicited the help of a Japanese craftsman to devise a more visually acceptable alternative, and kintsugi was born. Kintsugi has long reflected common philosophical views in addition to acting as an aesthetic ideal. The technique is specifically tied to the Japanese concept of wabi sabi, which incentivizes recognizing beauty in the defective or imperfect. The mending process was also influenced by the Japanese concept of motanai, which conveys sadness when something is discarded, as well as mushin, which is the acceptance of the change. And hence, in the light of the global pandemic, the theme of Lexicon 2022, Kintsugi, is an invigorating theme that asserts the idea that human flaws are extraordinary and they are not something to be construed as unfavorable. Humans are beautiful creatures carrying distinctions of imperfection. For instance, the onset of pandemic since 2020 has brought about trying times in our lives wherein it has transformed us in one way or another. Yet, this flawed identity has changed us for better and made us resilient enough to fight back, making us realize the substantiality of the wealth of life, our family, and loved ones.
Before we kickstart this function, I would like to thank our chief guest, Mr. Amit Chaudhary, for taking his precious time out and gracing this occasion with his presence. Even though he needs no introduction, I want to say that he is the author of several novels, the latest one of which is A Friend of My Youth. He is also a poet, an essayist, a short story writer, and a musician. So we sincerely hope that you enjoy the event. And I'll be honest, I'm also a little sad that this event is online since the pandemic hasn't uplifted yet. But if I was there, I'd have like ran first to you to sign my copy of A Strange and Sublime Address because hosting can wait, but my obsession with literature takes precedence. Okay, I was joking though. My professors are here. I obviously wouldn't be intelligent. Hence, but okay, moving on. We would also like to thank our head of department, Professor Singhi Malhotra, and the ELA advisor, Professor Shubhi Avadi, for giving us their consent as well as the complete creative freedom for organizing this event. Without whom we are incomplete. They support us in many ways. Like you can see, I'm literally sitting in Simi ma'am's room right now, and she asked me if I will be taking snacks. So yeah, like you can see, they support us in many ways unimaginable, and they help us with ideas as well as the execution of those ideas, as well as giving us the necessary moral support. So, without much further ado, I would first assure the audience that you will for sure enjoy today's event. And we have different events coming up, such as a panel discussion, which will come up next. Then we have an expository competition, slam poetry competition, an open mic competition, and other offline events such as narrative writing, picture story, a book jacket designing, creative writing, and obviously meme making. So this was all from our side. Thank you. And now I would request Professor Singhi Malhotra, our head of department, to kindly address the audience.
Thank you so much, Amber. Professor Amit Chaudhary, our chief guest this afternoon, all my dear colleagues from the department, my dear friend and colleague and someone I admire a lot, Dr. Shubhi Abadi, who's the ELA advisor. My dear students from the department, especially the organizing team. You've already heard Shivangi and Amber, and these are the most amazing people that I know in the department, but all the other students as well of the department who continue to inspire us with the kind of things that they pull off, like the theme itself of the fest, which is Kintsugi. I mean, one could not have had a more beautiful, more fitting, more sensitive theme than the kind which has been picked up by the students. So on behalf of the Department of English, I welcome all of you to this Lexicon Fest 2022. And like I said, that I owe my gratitude to Dr. Shubhi Abadi, the ELA advisor, and her leadership, and the organizing team for thinking of the fest through the lens of Kintsugi. And they've curated the whole festival around this theme. Already Shivangi has spoken about wabi-sabi and the philosophy and the aesthetics of this Japanese, concept of wabi-sabi and also Kintsugi. I think this is something that only literature department could have come up with, and of course, it's been so important these 2 years to talk of bibliotherapy. I mean, we've had this theme running through the department, through the different festivals that we've had, and we've thought about, what is the kind of role that literature plays, especially in the time of COVID, especially in the time of lockdown, and when we are sitting in our silos and in our boxes, so to say. But I really welcome all of you, all the students, all the dear colleagues, all the people who have joined us from other parts. Asya is also here. And of course, our special guest, Professor Amit Chaudhary, who's here with us. I was just, just talking to him a little before this, that the last event, physical event that probably we had was when Professor Amit Chaudhary was here. And it's only fitting that he's here with us today. And we're really grateful to him that he's taken our time in spite of having flown into Delhi only just last night. But, we're really looking forward to your inaugural address, Professor Chaudhary. I mean, you've been such an important part of conceiving this festival. And so we're really grateful that you've agreed to be here. But I really want to take this opportunity to congratulate the students. I mean, they're the ones who really are the most inspiring part of the conference and of the festival. And I'm really looking forward to participating in the festival and actually learning from all the stuff that they've curated for us. I mean, they're the I mean, I keep telling Amber that she's the rock star, but I think there's so many rock stars in our department that, one just feels so proud and so happy and so much full of love and admiration for the kind of students that we have who continue to, motivate us and inspire us to keep doing better for them. And I want to thank the whole organizing team and Dr. Shubhi Apte, and I welcome everybody to the fest. I'm pretty sure the 2 days of the treat that they have curated for us is going to be really exciting. I am really looking forward to it, but I'm not going to stand much more between you guys and the real person that we all want to hear. That's Professor Amit Chaudhary. But I really want to thank Dr. Shubhi Apte and the organizing team. This is absolutely fantastic. I'm absolutely overwhelmed with the kind of fest that you've been able to pull off. Thank you so much, and a welcome to everybody.
Thank you so much, ma'am. It's always nice to hear from you. Now we would request Professor Shubhi Apte, our ELA advisor, to kindly introduce the chief guest for this event.
Thank you, Amber. And now I formally welcome Professor Amit Chaudhary. It's a matter of great honor and privilege that we have with you here today for the fest to inaugurate it. Professor Amit Chaudhary is the author of 7 novels, the latest of which is Friend of My Youth. He's also a poet, essayist, short story writer, and musician. His works of non-fiction include Finding the Raga, published last year, and his 3rd book of poems, Ramanujan, came out last year in the UK. Among the awards he has won for his fiction are the Commonwealth Writers' Prize, the Los Angeles Times Book Prize for Fiction, the Government of India Sahitya Academy Award, and the inaugural Infosys Prize in the Humanities. As a musician, he has performed on BBC television and radio and at Queen Elizabeth Hall, London, and was awarded the Sangeet Samman by the West Bengal government in 2018. He's Professor of Creative Writing and Director of the Center for the Creative and Criticism at Ashoka University. He is a Fellow of the Royal Society of Literature and Honorary Fellow, the Modern Language Association. Last time, Professor Chaudhary came to deliver the Ahmed Ali Memorial Lecture, and let me tell you, all the students and faculty members were enthralled by his lecture, and I'm sure we're going to have a scintillating inaugural lecture. Over to you, Professor Chaudhary.
Thank you so much, Shubhi and Simi. I'm addressing you by your first names. I hope that's okay.
Yeah, perfectly fine, you should, sir.
I'm looking at the. So I'm going to speak for 15 minutes. I was told to speak for about 15 minutes, and that's what I'll do. So do I formally inaugurate this festival? In which case I'll say this festival is inaugurated. Let the show begin. Anyway, I'm really pleased to be here. I mean, I would have loved to have, actually gone back to Jamia for what is now called in-person, for an in-person event. Some people even call it offline, which is really interesting. So anyway, but that was still not to be, but I hope it will happen in the future. I'd like to return to Jamia, and I recall my sort of experience of speaking there very vividly, and the talk that day came on the back of the anti-CAA protests, and therefore were kind of impelled and buoyed up by a general atmosphere of rethinking, what it means to be who we are in this country. Just as, others were telling us who we are, who we are supposed to be. A kind of robust counter thrust had taken place. And this had taken place not only in the academy, but on the street, and not only from the usual kind of, tribe. I mean, sorry to use that word. I'm not using it negatively. I can't think of another word now. Of political activists, but people who had been transformed by what was going on. Today, uh, we are two years from that event, which I think took place just before the pandemic in March, and and things have been in a state of abeyance, but at the same time, the, the the kind of anxieties and worries that had brought about that invigorating response on the streets, the conditions for those anxieties and worries, politically speaking, have only deepened. But the now abortive anti-CA protests still remain a kind of beacon in the memory. And then, of course, the pandemic happened and brought about other anxieties and losses, personal losses in all of our lives, and now we have the war in Ukraine. I have to say I had not heard of Kintsugi, if I've got that word correctly, before I was invited to this to inaugurate this festival by Opik Ganguly, and I said, well, okay, what does this festival entail, and what do I need to talk about? And he said, could you talk about the theme of the festival, Kintsugi? So then I had to find out what Kintsugi is, and I have to say I've been practicing Kintsugi for a long time, long before I knew what it was. And Kintsugi I suppose it's a fundamental position in the arts, with or without a source or a kind of social or political context to explain its practice, to explain our turning to its practice. But I would say I turn to this practice of embracing the fragmentary and the incomplete in a way that has to do with a kind of response to, or a riposte to, the tendency of our own consciousness and our own sort of artistic practices to become practices of domination. And it's against those ways of thinking that move towards mastery and domination that one turns towards the incomplete and the fragmentary. And this is also an important and fundamental kind of move in modernism, and its rejection of the legacy of the Enlightenment and the Renaissance in Europe. So the legacy of the Renaissance, well, one way in which one might kind of look at examples of that legacy would be to do with the art of the Renaissance. I'm not so much talking here about the early Renaissance and its art, which still remains formalistic and emerging from, Byzantine and earlier forms of representation, and which also are religious, partly religious in their provenances. But the Renaissance and the Enlightenment is the time of the emergence of the human, and with the emergence of the human, even the gods and goddesses and mythologies as represented in Renaissance art need to have human recognizability, human centrality. Human beings in the period of the Enlightenment become central in a way that no God ever was before. And moreover, they need to have human emotions. So just as objects and we should mention objects here because Kintsugi is about objects and artifacts. It's not just about humans, it's about artifacts. It reminds us of Sontag's, Susan Sontag's kind of description of the melancholic temperament in connection with Walter Benjamin. The melancholic is always more attracted to objects than to human beings. So, so we are looking at a different cultural sphere from the one of the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, where the human being emerges and occupies center stage with other cultures, including cultures that produce something like Kintsugi. We are looking at a more level playing field, to use a very crass term, where various things, including objects, occupy and ask for our attention and occupy the space of our attention. So it's not as if the object is important only in as much as it's part of a human context. It creates its own context, and this, I think, is something that you see in the way Kintsugi is thought of in terms of the object and its history. And for me, this is one of the kind of way modernism emerges, also through its encounter with other cultures. You see, at that time, when modernism begins to emerge, or say Impressionism and Post-Impressionism, by the end of the 19th century, a lot is happening in terms of the West and Europe being exposed to non-European cultures, which give them back an idea of a universe in which the human need not be central. So there are the Japanese prints. There's Kintsugi is something that emerged much later, but the consciousness of it. But it's part of a similar sort of environment of which will help to critique a human-centered idea of history and of the arts, of representation that the Enlightenment and the Renaissance give us. So when we have a human-centered idea of representation, then we begin to think of everything in terms of the human and also of human psychology and emotion. And as I said, in the early Renaissance paintings, and certainly pre-Renaissance in Europe, you don't have gods or mythic beings exhibiting on their faces a psychological expression or emotion. It's only gradually, as the Renaissance develops and the human being becomes more and more central, that we want our gods to emote like us. That the idea of emoting and the idea of the human being as somebody who possesses a psychology and expresses it becomes kind of a norm through which we look at everything, including beings which are essentially unfamiliar, such as mythic beings and gods. We begin to want them to look like us and emote like us. And we also want them to look real. So the ideas of realism and realism to do with representing reality, to make our representations of reality look as much like reality as is possible, begin to develop. We don't want reality to look as it began to then again look with the Impressionists and Post-Impressionists, semi-recognizable, incomplete, a blur. In the Renaissance, oil comes to center stage in helping oil, and the development of perspective helps create pictures which look super real, hyper real, and also, well, look like color photographs, but except with greater sheen. And then they not only become, as John Berger said, about property. So you might see the interior of a kitchen with a bowl of fruit or dead pheasants waiting to be put to some use. You not only see a lifelike representation of that through oil. The person who owns that painting also has a sense of double ownership, of owning the painting and also owning what's represented within it. It's like owning that kitchen, owning the table, the pheasant, the bowl of fruit. If in the midst of this you were to have cracks, you were to have incompleteness and fragmentariness, then you begin to lose your sense of mastery and control. Who is exercising mastery and control? It's the human being, the newly emerged human being in a human-centric universe. And an aesthetic such as this one of the Renaissance will tell us, or a worldview such as the Renaissance will tell us, besides speaking to us of the centrality of the human being, will also tell us that, decay means something negative, completeness means something good. And so we'll think in those binaries. And our idea of development also emerges from these binaries. So we have developed countries, an idea of development. In most countries now, the idea of development is deeply connected with a capital, of course, power, mastery, all these things I've been talking about earlier, and the erasures of older neighborhoods, histories. So against this, we have to have a countercultural thrust against these acts of mastery and domination. The countercultural thrust cannot be a kind of nostalgic or utopian thrust. It cannot say, we want to go back to some, Ram Rajya or ancient Greece. That cannot be the countercultural thrust. Now, the thing about Ram Rajya or ancient Greece or any of these utopias that often, I mean, I'm not scoring brownie points over here, but often the right, the far right enshrine, whether it's in our country or in other countries, have to do with an aesthetic of completeness and muscularity and hyperrealism. It is no accident that the kind of iconography of the right is generally, even in India, neoclassical. It's hyper-real. So if you look at Amar Chitra Katha comics or calendar art, what you see are very different from the stylized, textural, slightly incomplete figures of earlier artistic representations, which are made up of outlines, synecdoche. They don't aim for completeness. But it's with the emergence of cultural utopias to do with the past that you have, even in our country, neoclassical modes of representing the past, where the man, the god, is handsome but also very realistic, and not only realistic, hyper real, a Bollywood hero. And the same is true of the goddesses, their hyper reality, the heroine like air. So what we are talking about here is a kind of countercultural moment that moves against both the utopias of the past and this kind of onward movement we associate with greater and greater completeness, perfection, which we call development. Greater and greater perfection and greater completeness, which also means greater and greater mastery over our surroundings. Unless we have mastery over our surroundings, just as the way, in the way that the Renaissance painter wants to have mastery over what they represent by leaving nothing frayed or imperfect, by making it completely hyper-real. In the same way, developed societies also want everything to correspond to a particular blueprint of idealized reality. And that is what it means to go down those motorways or autobahns or be in those suburbs where all the frayed edges have been filtered out. And the frayed edge, the bringing in of the frayed edge or the broken kind of line, the crack, well, that is related to what you're talking about, kintsugi. And kintsugi, therefore, is a position in art which is extremely important in the history of art being countercultural and counter-utopian, and therefore complicating our idea of what mastery is. Does it have to do with control or knowing how to sort of let go of control? Is it that we, is it that skill that we are honing? The skill of letting go of control. Is that what art is about? Just want to show you a few images before I end, but also want to connect this to a few other things. Since we are speaking about Japan, if you don't mind, and if I still have time, I just want to read out a couple of passages. Do I have a bit of time? You sure?
Yes, yes.
Okay. In that case, here is Tanizaki. I don't know. Have you heard of Junichiro Tanizaki? A Japanese novelist, the Makioka sisters, but also the amazing short stories and essays, and of course his kind of account, his idiosyncratic account of Japanese architecture, which is called In Praise of Shadows, is very well known. And that's what I'm going to read out from in connection with kintsugi, although he doesn't mention that word in his book. But what he's bringing to the table in 1933, when he publishes In Praise of Shadows, is a kind of what I've been calling a modernist, non-utopian sentiment, but using the word Japanese rather than modernist, with which to understand that temperament. The temperament which is about a kind of historical attitude that doesn't have to do with mastering history, putting it together in a large kind of historical representation, but has to do with, let's say, as Anne Carson says, the stain, a tea stain, the stain of tea on a page. While she was reading, a little bit of tea got onto the page and left a stain on it. She's excited by that stain, and she calls that excitement the historical attitude. So the historical attitude for Anne Carson, who's, besides being a poet, a scholar and translator from antiquity, is to do with, again, history showing its cracks, our letting loose. We can only understand history if we do not want to master it and possess it and own it, but participate in its incompleteness and let go of it. So this is the aesthetic that Tanizaki is bringing here when he's is describing here Japanese architecture, but also the objects that are part of a Japanese household or a Chinese household. As a general matter, now I'm reading out from Tanizaki. As a general matter, we find it hard to be really at home. We, by we, he means the Japanese or the Oriental, the Japanese and the Chinese. We really find it hard to be really at home with things that shine and glitter. The Westerner uses silver and steel and nickel tableware. So here, by the Japanese, he means not somebody who has an authentic identity, but somebody who is at an angle to what he calls the Westerner, or a certain kind of person who's invested in this idea of development and completeness. So there are many Westerners who themselves are moderns and modernists who are equally at an angle to this aesthetic or this vision or worldview. But for now, let's say the Westerner over here just means those who are invested in this aesthetic and ideal of development and mastery and completeness. So back to Tanizaki, the Westerner uses silver and steel and nickel tableware and polishes it to a fine brilliance, but we object to the practice. While we do sometimes use silver for tea kettles, decanters, or sake cups, we prefer not to polish it. On the contrary, we begin to enjoy it only when the luster has worn off, when it has begun to take on its dark, smoky patina. Almost every householder has had to scold an insensitive maid, those were the days, who has polished away the tarnish so patiently waited for. And when we were getting our house painted like 2 months ago, some the young people who were working there took the initiative and also polished many of our statuettes, and we said, why did you do this? Isn't it nicer? I mean, the original wasn't like that. They said, no, but everybody wants it done that way. This is the neoclassical mode, the utopian idea of history, where history is not just distant, it must shine and be complete, which has now gripped our country, as opposed to what Tanizaki is talking about and what Anne Carson, in connection to the tea stain on the page, calls the historical attitude, something different. This lack of desire to master history and control it. Now, I spoke about Westerners who are not invested or uninvested or disinvested in this idea of development. And one such key person is Walter Benjamin. And I'm going to read out a paragraph from Walter Benjamin, a German critic who killed himself, I think in 1940, because he could not escape France, as France fell to the Nazis. He was Jewish, so there were obvious reasons why he was trying to flee. But before that, he had, besides growing up in Berlin, lived in Paris, and called Paris the place of which shelters the flâneur. By the flâneur, he means the loiterer, the person who's not trying to get somewhere, but gets distracted and loiters instead. So this ties up with what we're talking about in terms of mastery, progress, development, and countercultural kind of impetuses or thrusts, which take the shape not of utopias, but of waiting, of getting distracted, of going into a bylane, of loitering. So he says that the flâneur could only have been born in Paris and not in Rome. He contrasts these two cities. The flâneur is the creation of Paris. The wonder is that it was not Rome. But perhaps in Rome, even dreaming is forced to move along streets that are too well paved. And isn't the city too full of temples, enclosed squares, and national shrines to be able to enter undivided into the dreams of the passerby? along with every paving stone, every shop sign, every flight of steps, and every gateway. The great reminiscences, the historical frissons, these are all so much junk to the flaneur, who is happy to leave them to the tourist. And he would be happy to trade all his knowledge of artists' quarters, birthplaces, and princely palaces for the scent of a single weathered threshold or the touch of a single tile, that which any old dog carries away. What he's saying is this, that the monuments, the birthplaces of great people, the princely palaces, of which Rome is full of, is junk as far as the flaneur is concerned. The flaneur is not interested in the monumental. The flaneur is interested in the scent of a single weathered threshold or the touch of a single tile, a tile that may have become dislodged since it is something that any old dog can carry away. Basically saying the flaneur is interested in junk. History, the monumental is junk to the flaneur, but junk is history to the flaneur. It is junk which excites the flaneur. And let me then show you a whole aesthetic that arises out of junk and the use of junk. Besides, kintsugi, which is a kind of salvaging of an object that would have become junk because it had broken, but then is salvaged in order not for it to be made complete again, but to show its brokenness. Let me show at least one image. Obik, why don't you show us this Bull's Head by Picasso? I think it's the second last link that I sent you. Are you able to get hold of it? If not, we don't need to show it. Am I audible, by the way? I mean,
yes, sir, you are. Just a second, sir. I'm trying to share it. I don't know why it's not getting shared. Just a second.
Abhik, if you're facing an issue, you can send it to me. I can just share this.
Fine. Check your mail and sending them over the mail.
All right.
It's fine. I mean, we don't have to see the image if it's going to take up more time. It's just what I
It's
want
a
to do.
take 2 minutes. It's just like a few seconds. Yeah.
Okay. You've got it. You've got the link. Yeah, I can't show you all these images, but the Bull's Head by Picasso. Who is showing the images? Is it Obhik or?
Yes, sir, it's me.
I think I've frozen out. Am I?
You're perfectly visible and audible. I mean, there's your image is not frozen at all.
Because I can suddenly see that. That's the Bull's Head. Many of you have probably seen this image before. It's made out of a bicycle seat and bicycle handlebars in the 1930s, maybe. Can you scroll down, Obik? These are bits and pieces. No. Scroll down that same image. No. There is a text below the image. I wonder if you could scroll. Is it possible to scroll down that page?
No, so actually I downloaded that image because it wasn't
Oh,
coming
okay.
on
So
yeah.
what Picasso says is that he wanted to do something with the handlebar of the bicycle, which is falling apart, I think, if I remember correctly, and the bicycle seat. It came together for him as a kind of artifact, which became this bull's head, and and he says he wanted to sort of tread this delicate line where the onlooker would see the bull's head, but also see the handlebar and the seat of the bicycle. He said that delicate line needed to be traversed for the full richness of the presentation, uh, to be palpable to the viewer. That something had been made out of odds and ends. The odds and ends were visible, and yet they had become transformed into something else. But the process of transformation had not been cast aside in favor of a finished and completed object, where you no longer see the kind of elements with which it's made. So, for instance, just the last image, Obi, can you just show us the other image you went to from Magritte? So here you have Magritte's painting of a window looking out onto a landscape until you see it's a painting. So here Magritte is punning on the fact that Western art gives us a desire to turn our paintings, our representations of reality into transparent windows, whereby we might kind of look upon reality as if we're looking through a window into a view that we somehow possess. But of course, it's only a construct. And that's why he puts those three legs of the easel underneath the window, turning it into a canvas. But the canvas is transparent. It could serve as a window. But the bull's head isn't transparent. It eschews transparency. It wants us to feel texture, incompleteness, fragmentariness. And this gives us this lack of mastery, this access to an aesthetic that lets go of mastery gives us inexplicable pleasure. It's the pleasure of art. Art is incompleteness. It's only through entering that realm, this one realm that does not want to possess, but wants to let go, that we can feel this particular excitement and delight. So, in the end, it's not about sadness or decay, or it might be about decay, but it's not about something coming to terms with something negative. It's being unshackled from the domination of the complete, of the idea of the complete, of the idea of the developed, that gives us so much joy. We are dominated by these ideas. We want to access incompleteness, because incompleteness is another word for things opening up away from our domination, our desire to dominate it. That's it, really. I mean, these were the kind of various thoughts that came to me from this idea of kintsugi, and I could talk forever about it, because this is an aesthetic that I have been practicing throughout my kind of life as a writer or whatever I do.
Thank you so much, sir. Shivangi?
Thank you, Professor Amit Chaudhary, for inaugurating the fest so skillfully. It was very informative to hear from you, especially with your notable artistic references. We look forward to your part in the panel discussion. Also, thank you, Shubhi ma'am. It is always a pleasure to hear from you. We are so grateful for all your love and support. We will now be moving into a short break of, I think, 1 hour. Sorry. Um, okay,
Okay,
we
now I'll be proposing a vote of thanks, Shivangi. Thank you. Okay, thank you. It is my proud privilege to propose a vote of thanks on this occasion on behalf of the Department of English, Jamia Millia Islamia, and English Literary Association. I would like to thank Professor Amit Chaudhary for acceding to our request to be here. And thank you, sir, for such an insightful and penetrating lecture. Um I think your lecture has really set the tone of the fest, and we couldn't have had a more befitting beginning to this fest. Thank you, sir, and we really enjoyed thoroughly. I'd like to thank now Professor Simi Malhotra for her unflinching support and encouragement, and for all the creative freedom she allows us to do whatever we want our way. Thank you, Professor Nishad Zaidi, for coming here and being with us. Thank you, Sumana Roy, and all the colleagues from the department who've joined here. Thank you to all the students who joined here. And last but not the least, thank you to the ELA team Lexicon who worked hard to make this fest a success. Thank you. And let me just tell you that Professor Amit Chaudhary will be joining us for the panel discussion, and I'm sure we're going to have a very enriching session. So please join us for the panel discussion at 2. Thank you. See you all at 2.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Chaudhary. We'll see you in a little bit more time. And there's so many people who joined us, Asya Zahoor and also Professor Shamla Narayan, and so many colleagues joined us. So thanks, everybody. And Sumana also. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Yes, Asya Zahoor, thank you. And let me tell you, Asya is also the judge for the slam
Yes.
poetry. So we'll be meeting her and listening to her also. Thank you, Professor Narayan also. Thank you a lot.
Thank you very much. It was lovely.
See you.